Act now and prepare for the future.
In the years immediately preceding the Great War of 2077 between China and the United States, both sides were scrambling to research a new weapon that would give them an edge in the coming conflict. Chinese government-funded programs began to research invisibility, while the United States government tapped the resources of American private industry to develop a secret biological weapon that could defeat the Chinese. One company, a high-technology scientific research firm known as Westech, was already a major American defense contractor and quickly became involved in tipping the global scale. In the first Fallout, the Vault Dweller explored a location in New California called The Glow, which was in fact an underground Westech research facility that had been directly targeted by the Chinese nuclear warheads during the Great War. While exploring the highly radioactive ruins, the Vault Dweller discovers that Westech had created a number of useful, yet volatile, biological, chemical, and conventional weapons for the American military. Potent laser and plasma weapons were being experimented within the facility, and power armor, massive self-contained suits of mechanized combat armor that turned a single soldier into a walking tank, were also developed there. Most importantly, research into immunity-boosting drugs designed to combat biological weapons agents was being conducted by Westech, which led to the creation of the PvP, and later, the FEV. One fear amongst the American military of this period was that the Chinese would deploy biological weapons against American troops. These would be powerful genetically engineered superviruses that would decimate other armies and civilian populations without a single shot being fired. Thus, Westech had initiated the Pan-Immunity Virion Project, or PvP, to develop a way to stimulate the human immune system in such a way that it could naturally counteract any Chinese biological agents. It was determined that altering the subject's DNA in such a way that its dual helical structure transformed into a quadruple helical structure would render the recipient immune to almost any known or engineered pathogen. During Westech's testing phase of the PvP in 2075, abnormal side effects were observed developing in the test subjects. The test animals began to grow dramatically larger in size and muscular structure, and their brain activity increased. Seeing the potential military applications of these unexpected results, the US Army sent its own military scientists into the facility to secure the project and rename the PvP virus as the Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV. Not content with producing mere immunity to disease, the Army's researchers hoped that the FEV would turn its soldiers into abnormally strong and intelligent supermen, capable of defeating many times their own number of Chinese soldiers. When the testing on animals reached its logical conclusion, the American military moved the entire apparatus of FEV research to the Mariposa military base in California, where secret human testing on military prison inmates proceeded. However, the grim nature of the research being carried out at Mariposa greatly unnerved many members of the US Army garrison guarding the base. The nature of the military scientists' work, which had up until then been kept a secret from the Army grunts, caused them to revolt when they discovered the truth. Colonel Robert Spindell, the officer in charge of the garrison, lost his mind and committed suicide. His second-in-command, Captain Roger Maxson, took command of the troops and began interrogating the Mariposa scientists. Rattled by the vile things the scientists were doing to their test subjects, and incredulous of the claim that the science team was only following orders that had been handed down from the highest levels of the Pentagon, Captain Maxson had the researchers executed. Later, he announced the Mariposa military base to be in full secession from the United States, and his own unit to have left the US Army. Only days after these actions, in October 2077, the Sino-American War reached its climax as nuclear bombs and warheads fell from the sky, and the United States ceased to exist as a unified nation. Disgusted with the Mariposa base and haunted by the fate of the FEV test subjects, along with the executed scientists, Maxson decided to lead his troops and their families to the federal government's Lost Hills emergency bunker. where they would later use their high-tech military equipment and knowledge brought from the Mariposa base to form the Brotherhood of Steel. The Mariposa military base remained silent for a long time after the bombs fell. Sometime after the Great War, however, a group of explorers from New California, including the future mutant Harold, entered the base looking to end a peculiar proliferation of mutated animals which seemed to be coming from the installation. Leading the expedition was Dr. Richard Gray, previously known as Richard Moreau, until he was exiled from Vault 8, one of the massive underground bunkers created by Vault-Tec Industries as part of Project Safehouse. When Gray's team entered the Mariposa base, most were killed when they encountered the base's still active automated robotic defense systems. Eventually, only Gray and Harold are known to have remained of the original group. Harold was knocked out and somehow woke up out in the desert with the appearance of a ghoul without actually having any of the traits of one. Gray, however, was heading for bigger trouble. He had made it to the vat room, where massive bubbling cauldrons of the thick green nutrient solution that contained the FEV awaited to be used in experimentation. Gray was knocked into a vat by an automated crane and managed to crawl out after a month of complete exposure. While the FEV was designed to be injected into humans, Gray soon found out that direct physical contact with the nutrient solution that it grew in worked just as well. He began to rapidly mutate in horrible ways, turning into a tentacled blob of mutated flesh, but he also developed potent psychic powers, which were enhanced by consuming other living minds to expand his own psionic strength. As other wasteland wanderers explored the base over the years, Moreau eventually began experiments on these human subjects using primitive physical contact with the FEV. Gray found that many of his test subjects were turning into giant brutes with the intelligence of a child if they survived the mutational process at all. However, a rare few test subjects became the metahumans known colloquially as supermutants. Immune to both disease and ionizing radiation, and blessed with exceptional strength, intelligence, and endurance, supermutants were superior to pure strain humans in every way. They also possessed the exceptionally long life common to those individuals infected with FEV, as well as, unbeknownst to Gray at the time, total sterility. Gray, who now called himself the Master, had long lamented the needless destruction of human civilization caused by the final nuclear holocaust of the Great War. In his warped state, he decided that he would have to force humanity to evolve beyond its own destructive impulses. If everyone could be as perfect as his supermutants, there would no longer be any reason for human conflict and the misery it wrought. Those who could not evolve along the lines the Master desired would have to die. The Master began seeking out uncontaminated, pure-strained humans in New California, with whom he could create new mutants and build his super-mutant army. However, creating new supermutants proved to be a hit-or-miss process. The great majority of supermutants produced by the Master, and later his lieutenant, in the Mariposa base's FEV vats were big, dumb brutes. Physically, they were vastly superior to pure-strained humans, but they possessed the intelligence of children. The Master was certain this mutational randomness was related to the amount of radiation damage suffered by an individual. Humans who had not been exposed to much of the post-nuclear environment's radiation produced more intelligent mutants after their FEV infection. His lieutenant, however, had a different theory. When the Chinese nuclear bombs hit the original West-Tec research facility and turned it into the region known only as the Glow, the impact of the nuclear shockwave cracked open a few nutrient solution tanks filled with FEV. The nuclear bomb's radiation then mutated this FEV into an airborne strain of the original virus, but this new airborne strain of the FEV did not have any real mutagenic effects on human beings. All it did was inoculate any person infected with it against the original mutational strain of the FEV, acting as a form of vaccine and giving exposed creatures some limited resistance to the FEV's mutational effects. As a result, the ideal subject for FEV mutation was someone who had not been exposed to the airborne form of the FEV following the Great War. Both of these conditions, lack of radiation exposure and airborne FEV inoculation, were present in only one known population: vault dwellers. Each vault contained around 1,000 viable subjects who could be infected with the original strain of the FEV and turned into intelligent supermutants. Which factor exactly determines what would emerge from an FEV infection, accumulated radiation levels, or inoculation by the airborne FEV strain is still uncertain, though as a rule of thumb, the less exposed the subject is to radiation, chemicals, and biological agents, the better. In 2162, a person known as the Vault Dweller managed to destroy the FEV vats, the Mariposa military base, and killed the master in his cathedral beneath the ruins of Los Angeles. In 2236, the Enclave, the surviving remnant of the United States federal government, excavated the ruins of the Mariposa military base, largely using slave labor gathered from the town of Reading, and eventually discovered the remains of the master's FEV vats deep inside the lower levels of the base. Though they had been buried in rock and forgotten for decades, the vats still contained that familiar green bubbling gunk, the nutrient solution that contained active particles of the forced evolutionary virus. The Enclave gathered samples to be sent back to the oil rig that served as their headquarters off the Pacific coast of California for further analysis. Before long though, the slave miners, some being fully exposed to raw FEV in the course of their labors, others likely falling into the FEV vats accidentally, began to mutate into a second generation of super mutants. The mutant slaves soon overthrew their Enclave guards, seizing their weapons, hardware left behind by the first mutant army, or anything lying around the ruins that could serve as a weapon. The super mutants stormed the upper levels and quickly overran the Enclave troops in the base. Panicked and retreating, the Enclave troopers on the upper levels fled the base and used explosives to seal the entrance, trapping the second generation mutants inside the base. Still, even though things went poorly at Mariposa, the Enclave had the samples of FEV its scientists needed. Back at the oil rig, the Enclave's United States Chemical Corps began work on the serum immediately. They found that it would be possible to create from the FEV an incredibly potent and lethal toxin. Dr. Charles Curling was the Enclave scientist who led this project under the direction of Dick Richardson, the President of the United States. In order for the research to progress, however, the Enclave needed test subjects. They required two test groups, one of uncontaminated pure strain humans, and another composed of the quote-unquote mutants that lived all over the mainland of the West Coast, who had suffered from nuclear radiation and airborne FEV exposure for decades. To the Enclave, this exposure made all the people of the wasteland genetically impure, regardless of how similar in appearance they were to pure strain humans. The mutant sample was easily obtained when the Enclave's troops kidnapped the entire population of the town of Arroyo, who were all the descendants of citizens of Vault 13, to see if they had suffered mutation after they left the vault. The pure strain human group proved difficult to obtain. The Enclave would not allow the Chemical Corps to use the Enclave's own people living on the oil rig, so they had to look elsewhere. Once again, the mainland provided the needed stock. Thanks to the United States government's pre-war Vault experiment project, the Enclave scientists were able to determine that the pure strain population of Vault 13 was largely intact. Thus, the Enclave troops traveled in force to Vault 13 and sent a command to the Vault's computers to open the Vault door. After taking care of some mild resistance from the surprised Vault dwellers, the Enclave's troops rounded up the residents of Vault 13 and shipped them off to the oil rig in vertibirds to take part in the Chemical Corps' FEV experiments. Before long, the Chemical Corps developed their viral supertoxin. It was found to be 100% lethal to humans who had suffered even mild radiation or airborne FEV exposure. Just as the Enclave was preparing to launch the poison into the North American jet stream to kill the entire population of the mainland, the Chosen One arrived at the oil rig on the Poseidon oil tanker that had sat in the ruins of San Francisco for years. He freed the survivors of the Vault 13 population, as well as his own Arroyo tribals, and started a self-destruct sequence on the oil rig that destroyed the entirety of the Enclave's headquarters, saving the surviving human population of the various American wastelands from a horrible death at the hands of the modified FEV strain. At least for a time. In the capital wasteland, centered in the ruins of Washington, D.C. on the east coast of what was the United States, yellow-skinned super mutants had also appeared, along with a modified version of the chimeric mutants known as centaurs. It was eventually learned that a modified version of the FEV was to blame for the emergence of this version of the super mutants and the centaurs on the east coast. In the capital wasteland, Vault 87 had been equipped with a large supply of the FEV. In 2077, following the fall of the Chinese nuclear bombs on Washington, D.C., the dwellers of Vault 87 had been forcibly infected with a modified version of the FEV as a part of the secret Vault experiment project controlled by the US government and the Vault Tech Corporation. The modified version of the FEV used in Vault 87 gave the skin of the super mutants it created a yellow-green tint and made these mutants stronger and larger as they aged, while greatly lowering their intelligence. This version of the virus also seemed to create more healthy super mutants than their new California counterparts, who were much more mutilated by the virus-induced mutations as a result of the Master's modifications. However, in the Capital Wasteland, highly intelligent supermutants develop much less frequently, with only 2 civilized supermutants encountered in Fallout 3, Uncle Leo and Fox. Once in Vault 87, the Lone Wanderer can overhear 2 supermutants discussing collecting stronger men to make into stronger supermutants by putting them in the green stuff. This is thought to be the ultimate intended fate of the supermutant captives strewn across the Capital Wasteland, and the reason why they are not simply killed or eaten. Uncle Leo also mentions that supermutants periodically abduct humans to create more supermutants using their diminishing supply of FEV located in Vault 87. While attempting to reduce the size of the giant ant populace of the Capital Wasteland, one Dr. Lesko lazily used the FEV, possibly a mutated version, as a shortcut while trying to modify the genes, and as a result of this shortcut, the ants ended up with the ability to breathe fire instead, which caused the deaths of everyone in Grey Ditch. The virus was found stored beside one of his terminals in Marigold Station, which was thought to be a controlled environment. The Enclave's president John Henry Eaton attempted to convince the Lone Wanderer to use the same modified form of FEV originally developed 30 years earlier by the Enclave on the West Coast to taint the activation of Project Purity. Like its predecessor, this strain of the FEV had been created by the Enclave to kill all forms of life with any degree of radioactive or virally induced mutation. If the Lone Wanderer carries out Eden's plan, then in the Broken Steel add-on the wastes are devoid of those who had hoped to find new beginnings with the cleansing of the water of the Potomac River. At some unknown point in time, the Institute, located in the Commonwealth, came into possession of a modified strain of FEV. Considering the Institute was once known as the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, a pre-war facility dedicated to scientific advancement, it's likely their possessing of the FEV dates back to before the bombs fell. Further evidence of this can be found in the personal diary entries of Swan, a super mutant behemoth residing in a pond near Boston Common. According to his diary entries, he used to be a convicted criminal from before the war who was offered a second chance if he agreed to be a test subject. Following the Great War, the Institute vacated underground where they continued to advance in scientific innovation, including the study of the FEV. Led by Brian Virgil, the Institute would periodically kidnap unsuspecting people from the surface and conduct experiments on them within the FEV laboratory of the Bioscience Department. These particular supermutants displayed typical mutant traits, such as abnormal body mass, prolonged lifespan, and radiation immunity. Like the Vault 87 supermutants, their bodies continued to grow unnaturally large with age. After exposure, the test subjects were locked in separate rooms where social experiments were conducted to test their cognitive functions and processing skills. Among these experiments included solving block puzzles, playing board games, and interacting with house cats, all of which failed due to the violent nature of the supermutants. All subjects who were deemed failures were cast out into the wasteland, which explains the presence of supermutants in the Commonwealth by 2287. The Institute eventually ceased experimentation on the FEV due to the project's abandonment by Virgil, who became overcome with guilt from ruining so many innocent lives. After destroying his data and escaping the Institute, he infected himself with a strain of the FEV, turning himself into a supermutant so that he could survive the harshness of the glowing sea and hide from the Institute. Being a human of significantly pure DNA, Virgil did not succumb to the stupidity most mutants suffer, and instead managed to retain his intellect, memories, and civility, which may explain a relation between this strain of FEV and the strain used by the Master. Despite the production of the Institute's supermutants ending, the presence of supermutants in the Commonwealth is still a daily threat. But because they possess no access to the FEV, no knowledge of their creation, and no proper form of leadership, they are little more than just stronger versions of raiders. Their only goal in life is to kill and conquer as much as they possibly can.